Come in. Oh, Jana's going to be brave and actually show her face. You win the prize.
Hey,
Yeah. We'll have to, at least Bob, we've got a picture of Bob. We can conjure him up in our mind.
when you're recording, it makes it such a deterrent for being on video.
Does it really?
Yeah, I mean, if it's going to be a experiential thing.
Yeah, the experiential part will be in small breakout rooms, so no one will ever see those.
Got it.
But yeah. Hello, Bob.
Good afternoon.
Oh, and there's Virginia. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, now everybody, see, you set it. You set the tone, the pace here, Jana. Everybody's being brave now.
I'm the trendsetter.
You are. And I know a few of you, but I'm curious where you're calling from today and what brought you to this conversation.
Well, I've been following you for a couple of years, and I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, USA.
Okay, great. We had somebody from Charlotte on this morning, so yeah, let me get a few more people here.
I'm in Evanston, Illinois, just north of Chicago.
Oh,
And I attended one of your, I don't know if it was a WebEx session, something like that. And your approach really resonated as something that felt both familiar to me and I don't know, very additive. So
okay.
like that nice overlap of.
Yeah. Do they still have the Let Us Entertain You restaurants there? Does that ring a bell?
I don't know. I've only been here for 8 months.
Ah, well, okay. They used to have the most amazing chain of restaurants that were quite ahead of their time and had some really fun themes and yeah, great food. And I almost went to college in Evanston, so yeah, great. And how about the rest of you? So Sharman, where are you coming from today?
I live in Kirtland, which is a suburb of Seattle.
Mhm.
And I got a chance to attend, I think, 2 of your webinars like this. And
Okay,
it was very insightful.
okay,
So, I'm checking it out.
okay, good for you. Hi, Janice.
Yeah,
And where are you today?
I'm on Waiheke Island in Auckland, New Zealand, just having survived a cyclone.
Ah, so yeah, you must know Anne, right? She was, I don't know if you know Anne, she's a supervisor, lives up on one of the coasts there. I can't remember the name of it, sorry, but she was over in Auckland with one of her sons and had to dash back before they were sort of, the plane was like in the movies, like this ahead of this cyclone that was coming back. Yes,
Yeah.
quite
We've been cut off in some places, which is a really interesting experience, that kind of sense of isolation. Yeah, but lovely to see you.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, you've had a rough patch of weather there. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a real thing. We think we live in a very benign environment, but when the world just does stuff to you, it really shakes you to your core. And I think there's high levels of anxiety around the place. I'm noticing it in my clients too.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Kimmy, how good to see you. How are you today?
I'm good, a bit tired. It's 11 p.m. here in the UK,
Yeah.
but I missed the earlier session. So yes, good to see you and everyone.
Great. And I don't know if Robert, if you can come off mute if you'd like to introduce yourself. If not, relax and enjoy yourself. There he is.
Hi there. I'm in Denver and I'm driving right now, so I spare you the camera view of me driving.
We'll have an amazing conversation, but be safe.
I will. Yeah, thank you so much.
Don't stress about it too much. Yeah.
Good one.
And Virginia, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks, David. I'm Virginia Aldrin, and I'm actually from Torquay, the Great Ocean Road in Australia, Victoria. But David, I'm just going to say, this is an information session on the ID Way, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, I think I attended one of these earlier, so I don't want to be rude. I think I'm going to just go out of here because I'm really excited to be part of that program.
Excellent. Wonderful. Yeah, we're going to do one of the practices today, but you'll get it in the program, so you won't have missed anything.
Okay. All right. You have a wonderful,
Thank
well, it's
you.
morning over here and I can hear that it's all times of day. So everybody enjoy yourself. Bye,
All right.
David. Bye,
Bye.
guys.
And Tom, how's life in Japan today?
Oh, it's okay. It's getting colder, but yes, the cherry blossoms will be here very soon. And right now we got the plum blossom. It's a nice little first act of opening act before the main stage.
Okay. So the plums are the understudy for the cherries.
Yes, yes.
Wonderful. All right. And anything anybody wants to share in terms of what they brought them here today or what they're most curious about?
I'm probably not going to form it in a coherent sentence, but I think I like this idea of integrative learning. So I think that's what's
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
brought me here to just see how that plays out.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna share with you a case, one of my favorite case studies using this work as a way to illustrate what it looks like in action. And then we're going to use one of the practices that's largely from a narrative release, but will play a big role in this program as well. So, yeah. Anybody else? All right. I'm going to switch gears and put the slides up for you so you can see those. There we go. So I thought, rather than just talk about this again, and we have some people that have been here before and some are new, we would actually give you both a case study and a lived experience. So I'm just going to start back here. Some of you have heard me talk about this. And I want to just share a bit about why I was really drawn. I use this slide a lot and why I was drawn to it for this particular conversation. If you follow LinkedIn at all, or you spend more than like 10 seconds on LinkedIn, it's this barrage of often stories and models and graphics and events and all kinds of stuff. And yeah, I've done some of the same. But when I think about kind of part of what inspired me for thinking about ID back 15, 16 years ago, when I was working on these large projects, particularly for the state of Oregon here in the States where I was living at the time and back again, people had sort of like two modes in our projects. They had work mode and training mode. And and they were very dutiful in both of those modes. But then when I started to really observe the projects that really did exceptionally well, there was sort of a spirit that they got with each other in the projects that transcended their work persona and their dutiful training participant persona. And it came down to this whole thing about, in some ways, to kindness. And it's not like the kindness like you would, like when you're a kid and your parents made you go visit your grandparents and you were told to be kind to them and, and to be on your best behavior and, the kind of things we often dreaded as a child. It's more in the Buddhist sense of loving kindness, of that when people brought that to their projects, they were far more inquisitive, far more tolerant of people that were slower to get on, get going, more cooperative. And I started to realize in that time, even as I was building up the theory and doing these major papers and projects, that in many ways, ID for me had become a way of life. And it's that these two bodies of work that are now brought together, NR and ID, really were the fundamental building blocks that underpinned narrative coaching the whole time. I just had never quite articulated them this way. So Kimmy, to your point, one of the pieces from ID is very much about an alternative theory of learning and development, and NR, as you'll see in a bit, is the capacity to deliver on that with courage. And one of the things that I think makes this particular program now quite unique is that we're bringing together the opportunity for you to develop yourself personally, and that's what gives courage, and develop yourself professionally, which is about the confidence to work in some different ways with your clients. And oftentimes those two are separate in our life. We might go to a yoga retreat and then do a professional development workshop. Well, this is actually bringing those together at the same time, because you need both to be able to work this way. So, so I'm going to just share with you this case story, and then stop and get your comments, your questions, and then we'll move into the practice itself. Okay. All right. So when I was living in Australia, I was on the executive development team for the country's biggest business school. And they won a very significant contract with one of the big banks in Australia to develop a suite of 7 leadership programs. And I had taught a lot of MBA programs and done a number of other things. What I didn't realize until this morning when I was getting ready for the morning session was I'd forgotten this project was the last traditional training program I've ever done, and I'll never do them again. So it was actually became a monumental pivot for me, and largely because of this particular case study I'm about to share. So I was charged with developing, in partnership with another university, 2 of the 7 programs, one of which was around effective communication for leaders. So this was, a big deal for the university. It was the largest project they ever had, and so of course the anxiety was up. Plus, they were pretty traditional and kind of stuck in their ways, and they had a very challenged HR leader, and so it took me months and months to get all the final sign-offs to build these 2 programs. It was agonizing, just the arguments over words and orders, and it was mind-numbing. So we rolled out the first couple of iterations of each of the 2 programs. And the preface for the case story is at the second of those, in the communication program, like when you're doing training, you sort of spot the people that are getting it and the people that are not, and the people that are interested and the people that are really not. And there was a woman that seemed really engaged and really switched on, and really liked her, felt like clearly the strongest leader in the room. And so after the workshop was over, we were kind of milling around, and they'd kind of had a tradition of drinks after workshops or whatever. And so I'm just talking with her. I'm just trying to get a sense for, what she found valuable, what she appreciated, what she was taking from the program. I thought, of all the people in the room, she's going to be the most articulate. This is what I got in response. And it makes you want to just go away and jump off a cliff. I've spent 4 months of my life to build this stellar program, worked my butt off with both the university and the corporate client, had to deal with prima donna faculty. I was just, and I was just crestfallen. I said, and I joked with her, and because I knew she would appreciate the humor and wouldn't take it personally. I said, you could have bought me a beer, and in 20 minutes I could have given you the tips and we could have gone home. We didn't need to do this program if that's all you're taking from this. And then I thought, hey, that was one of the best programs I ever built. She was a sharp leader, great participant. So I said, it's not us that's the problem. It's the way that we're organizing these programs. And so but I thought, well, it's a great opportunity. It's good money. I will continue until I got an invitation from the CFO of the bank. Not the kind of person you'd expect to be a trendsetter, but it turned out he was. And he said, I've heard really good things about David's program on communication, and we need that for our finance team leaders, of which there was about 30 of them. And would you guys be interested? And the university said, no, we don't do that. We don't do those kind of programs. You have to come to send them to our main thing. And I protested and said, here you have a willing participant with their own money, eager to do this. And so I first had to lobby them to say yes. I had to lobby the HR person to say yes. Then I had to fight for a month because I said, I will only do this for him if I get to do this my way. And I had some credibility with them because we had actually used my program and another program to help them benchmark and improve kind of how they were doing all the programs. So I'd kind of helped them out and kind of rescued them from kind of drowning in this project, in this contract. And so they sort of begrudgingly said, well, fine, whatever. And they had the money. So so I went and met with the CFO and I said, so what most interests you about this program? And he said, quote unquote, we suck at communication. I said, oh, really? So tell me some more about that, what that looks like. And so he said, well, this is a very PowerPoint driven organization, and our men and women are often called on because we are the financial brains and experts in the bank, at the highest level. And we don't know how to communicate effectively. So we have people bringing 50 and 60 slides to a 20 or 30-minute briefing in like 9-point font with handouts. And it's just not effective, and we're losing credibility, but the bank's suffering because we're not doing a good job communicating what we know. And I need to fix that. And he said some of the things I saw from some handouts I'd seen from somebody else said, I think there's some things in here that would be really helpful to us. And so I said, well, I'd like to do this a bit differently though, rather than just put you all through the program. They also had less time they were willing to commit. I said, what I would like is I would like each of your participants to actually bring a slide deck for a presentation they have to give in the very, very near future. And he thought, oh, that's a great idea. And I said, because I can teach them this in the workshop, but most of them will not do a thing with it when we're done. And it's just the way it plays out. And so I want to be able to support them. Plus, if you've got 30 people coming, they're going to have 30 different leadership needs and communication needs, which I won't know in advance. So there's no curriculum I could create that would account for all that. So I'm going to get rid of the curriculum. And I'm going to then spend time converting the other 2 faculty members into coaches. And then we're going to have them bring their slides. And I've got the four slide framework that we teach, built around the narrative coaching model. And we're going to give them 4 pieces of paper, 1 for each of the 4 slides. And we're going to tell them that you can't come to the workshop unless you bring a slide deck. And you can't leave until however many slides you've brought is turned into 4. And so I took the CFO's business card and they sent out the announcements. And then we had 2 or 3 people that conveniently forgot to bring their slide deck to the workshop. So I told them to go back to their desk, and they complained, like, who are you to tell me that? I said, well, if you have concerns about that, here's the CFO's phone number. Feel free to give them a call and tell them why you shouldn't have to bring your slide deck. Okay, fine. And they ran off and got their slide deck. And I said, we're going to walk alongside you and we're going to help you transform how you communicate and who you become in the course of communicating differently. And however many slides you brought, you get 4, you have to leave with 4. There was the first half an hour I was managing their panic. Well, you don't understand. I've got to do all. I understand. And we'll walk right with you the whole time. And if you fall down, you panic, you give up, you whatever, we'll pick you up and keep you going. And I said, I can guarantee you that you'll have 4 when you leave. Okay, fine. And then they got to work with each other. And we had, and I think of our original curriculum, we eventually used about 8 to 10% of it on very focused moments, either with small groups or a couple of individuals. And we said, and we walked them through the 4 slides. And they said, first off, just divide what you have into 4 piles. Which of these piles would the slides you have go in? And then we started helping them sort, and then they go, I don't know, why should I not include this? What am I going to do with this? And we'd come over and we'd give them some coaching. And then we'd say, so what would it be like for you to trust yourself that you can use what you know when you need it, as opposed to having to put it all in the slide deck? Well, I don't know if I could do that. Are you going to forget because it's not on the slide? Well, no, I know it really well. Then why don't you just keep it in your back pocket just in case you need it? But most of the time, you're not going to need this at all. So we just coach them across the day. And most of the time when they would turn to help, we would help them in the beginning. And as the day wore on, and then particularly the half day, we started saying, have you talked to anybody else in the room about this? Well, not really. Well, let's just say, we'll call him Bob in honor of Bob here. I was just talking to Bob like an hour ago, and he's facing the same problem. I think he's kind of figured it out. Why don't you go ask him what he's done? And by the end of that second half day, we were doing almost no coaching ourselves, except for under brand new circumstances. And they were in small groups working on things that were important to them. So fast forward, we say, now go out and give this talk using these new slides. And by the way, here's a free template. Go use this for any other thing you need to do before we meet again in 6 weeks. Just practice as much as you want. And so they went off, and one of which we did, and then they came back 6 weeks later, and they were just like kids in kindergarten. They couldn't wait to tell us about how it had turned out. And this is the way one of the examples I would give for this. There was a woman in the group who it just happened coincidentally that night after the half day, she was going off to give a presentation to the foundation of the bank for a really cool project she had for kids. And she said, if I had taken the rubbish I now see as rubbish that I'd prepared and over-prepared, they would have given me some token grant, patted me on the head and tell me to go away. She said, I got one of the largest grants in the history of the foundation using the 4 slides I created in the workshop. And we had a number of stories that way. And then they came then the purpose for that second half day was, we said, you remember when you left with 4? Well, at noontime when we leave, you're leaving with 1. Oh, oh. And then you tricked us. And I said, no, if I'd given you 1 slide in the first day, you would have all run away. And I said, and the reason for this 1 slide is that all the 4 CFOs of the bank are coming in at lunch to have lunch with you, and you're going to present your 1 slide to them. And I said, do you trust us? Yeah. Did we let you down before? Well, no. And so we're going to help you. We're going to spend the entire morning turning your 4 slides into 1. And lo and behold, they all did. And one of the CFOs said when he was, we were all done presenting, they were done presenting. He said, if we could talk like this every day, it would completely transform the bank. Why are we not talking like this? Now there's Michelle. I'll let Michelle in here. And so for me, this is a great illustration of how ID and NR come together. So the ID part of this is that we're using what we believe about learning and development to create an experience that's designed for what they actually need to learn, not what we want to teach. We're giving them something that's real and significant for them. So there's a stake in the game. They want to do well at this. They have a motivation. We're coaching them as opposed to trying to teach them, on and on. And so this is the ID part, is the structure that allows you to work like this when you have a situation like this. The NR piece is around both our own confidence and courage to get out of the comfort zone of teaching, to have to be in the reality of what they're experiencing in that moment in time. And you have no idea what's coming your way because you haven't planned any of this, other than kind of creating some loose structures or to help them, how to help them move through the slides. And the other thing is that we tend to focus so much when we're working with clients on what we're wanting to do. Really not, I don't think we ever fully appreciate what it's actually like for somebody in an organization to change. And so I want to help them for me, the greatest variable in my success in these projects is not me. It's the readiness and willingness of the client to do something. And so the narrative release is really helpful for the clients, as you'll see in the program, because it helps them get ready to allow themselves to learn. And I find most people in organizations have long forgotten how to learn. It's been beaten out of them in school, in some religious organizations, certainly in most companies. And so we want to reinvigorate their love of learning and their love of growing by making this such that this serves what they think is important, not what we think is important. And yes, there's a backdrop of what the CFO wanted, but he didn't try to tell me what we should do. He said, this is not, I don't really know anything about this kind of stuff. You guys do, but I know what I need to have be different. And I found over the years that almost all of my ID projects, very few of my ID projects come from HR. They have their own burdens. It comes from people that either lead groups or functional people like the CFO, executive directors, people that have a really clear line of sight about what they need and hope to be different, but they're willing to be in conversation with me or any of our other practitioners and open-minded to how they actually might get there. And so originally ID itself was a combination for me of organizational development and training and coaching in one single practice. Now, when I do these kind of projects, I might wear 8 or 10 hats in the same day. And your 8 or 10 hats will be different than mine. And we're setting this up to really optimize what we're creating so that any moment in time in your work with your clients becomes potentially transformative if you know how to be in those moments with them. And so the ID part of this will give you the structure about how to do this in the program. The NR will give you the courage and the clarity to stand with them in that space. So I'm going to stop there, and then I'm going to we'll engage in a practice ourselves so you can see what parts of this might feel like for you. But for now, I'm going to just see if you have any thoughts or questions. I'm going to take this part down so I can see you. There you are. And welcome, Michelle. Having her morning coffee. Did your kids bring you this coffee today? Oh, they're slacking off. You have to go tell them. David said you're slacking off. They got to pick up their game.
It was stick. Yeah. Joking, everyone. Sure. Hi, everyone.
So we just shared a case study, which you would have heard part of in the old ID program, Michelle. I just wanted to see from folks kind of what you heard in this, what stands out for you, what would you like to share? Yeah, Sherman.
I'll go first, kind of pushing myself to say
good for you
that I didn't understand most of it, but I like that you said through this process, which is a concrete like PowerPoint slides, make it shorter, you're changing their mindset. Mm-hmm. You're kind of like working internally than externally. So I think that is so powerful in a training setting, because like you said in that HR leader's comment, I got a few tips. So that is so common. Then kind of like what is one big shift or significant shift I do? And what is ID stand for?
Integrative development. Yeah. And if I said to the CFO, we're going to run a personal development workshop for your leaders, I would never have gotten the job, right? So we're going to be in disguise. We're going to actually help them to find themselves. So find their own voice. So a couple of them came back and said, wow, I've got some teenage kids. They're not paying any attention to me. They're now paying more attention. I'm using some of this in terms of how I talk to them, right? Ooh. And so by the end of the first day, it was their slides. So they owned what they had done all day. They were very proud. They were like, again, like kids in school, like you won't believe. I was laughing. I thought I was telling these couple of guys I remember, and it's like you want to run home and tell your mother, "Look at me, I got an A on the paper." Yeah, so it was fun. And anyway, so these are the kind of projects that this kind of work makes possible. Yeah, Kimmy.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing this. It almost reminds me of, you know, how they say a lot of the workforce is disengaged. It's almost like you're re-engaging them back. But the specific question I had was, could you help me understand, I guess, how narrative coaching and narrative release, like how they differ?
Yeah.
Please, thank you.
So narrative release, when I started, it was a pilot we ran. Michelle was in that. We ran it for a year with Carolyn, who will also be helping me with this program, and another woman, Lise, who had to step aside because of some family issues. But it began because my first career, like 1,000 years ago, I was a grief counselor, and I was also a hospital chaplain, and I just found myself in this space of dealing with people and grief, and I had a lot of my own life. And so narrative release began somewhat as a way of thinking about narrative coaching around difficult issues: grief, trauma, attachment, shadow work, etc. And then it kind of took on a life of its own through a lot of somatic work. And again, going back to, and you'll see this in the activity I want to invite you into, that sometimes, you know, if you have a group of people in a workshop you're doing that are, even if they've only 10 years into their career, they will have already been to dozens of workshops, the vast majority of which they'll have done nothing with. We imagine that they're this bottomless pit into which we just keep pouring stuff, and somehow they'll magically be, something will happen. And so the narrative release, in part, was dealing with this sort of exhaling, releasing, like, what do you need to clear out? Like compost, get rid of, like, so you can make room for what's actually trying to emerge or be learned by you right now. And then there's also a releasing into, like, if you, then now I can let go of this thing I was holding on to, make more space in my lungs to breathe in more. And so that's sort of like, we think of as sort of curating, you know, and starting to channel what are you trying to do. So there's that in and out releasing, in particularly around things like grief or anxiety or lack of safety and all the things that are plaguing a lot of workplaces these days. So, you know, I see a lot of what I would say are well-intentioned people teaching workshops about topics like resilience, but I don't imagine that a lot of people leave there feeling any more resilient than they were when they went in. They might have some more words, they might have some cool tools, and there's good stuff that comes in that, but fundamentally there's a kind of a rewiring and a reorganizing and a dealing with the realities of your environment kind of pieces. And so the narrative release is the same philosophy as narrative coaching, but allows you to go deeper. It actually decouples this from coaching, so you can use this work in any context that you're in. So if you've had an occasion to go through airports in the last year or be on airplanes, it's not a pretty sight often. And so I've used this, I mean, I didn't really plan this, but I've used this to support people to diffuse conflicts at airports or conflicts on planes by some very, very, very simple interventions that they wouldn't even recognize was an intervention. And just sort of, you can feel the energy building up in something. So how do you help the energy release without making a big deal out of it? So the narrative coaching is, again, largely in the coaching frame for most people most of the time. And the narrative release is, you can use that in any piece you want. And it's a great companion to integrative development because it helps you, you know, to be able to like stand. So like right before the pandemic, I was in Victoria in Australia. I spent a month with all the people at the very top of the Victorian government doing a series of combinations of leadership programs for which we had no curriculum for the entire month. These people were in like one of their worst bushfire seasons ever. The pandemic was already coming. You could see it showing up already in Australia. Just massive, massive, massive issues. So I'm thinking like what, and these people have been around for decades, like what curriculum could I possibly create that would be relevant for them, really? And so I said, what they really need is a safe place to talk to each other. So that's what we did. And I had tools. We did our first, it was my first organizational use of the 3 chairs, which was, I can share about later if you want, but, and we just brought out tools and resources from the group or from me when it became obvious that a group of them needed some help. Yeah. So yeah, that's the difference. So it's just the same kind of process, often on bigger issues in any context.
Super helpful. Thank you, David.
You're welcome.
Do you have any example for NR, like you did just shared the case study for the ID program?
So again, in the past, it's in my coach, it's showed up mostly in coaching because I don't do a lot of overt grief work anymore. I did it a lot in when I was doing a lot of big change projects, because companies often really struggle to actually address grief. They just want to have people get over it and move on and be changed. But I'm thinking about the way it showed up in a coaching context was and you'll get this more of this story if you come to the program, but I was working with the director of one of the departments of a big city, and they manage all the public works, all the engineering, all the sciencey, mechanical kind of stuff for the entire city. And he was by far and away the most workaholic person I've ever met, but hands down. And so we're kind of coaching, you know, had gotten some feedback and HR was concerned for him. And we were trying to kind of help him with his leadership. And so I'm going to tell you this next piece because it illustrates both halves of this. He was an engineer. My father was an engineer. He worked too hard. My father worked too hard. Oh, and by the way, my father was dying. And he actually died in the middle of this coaching contract. And this guy looked like he could have been a slightly skinnier twin of my brother, of my father. So I have to manage myself while I'm looking at this guy who's slowly killing himself by his work habits, while my own father's stayed away doing the same. But he's actually dying. There was a point in which, and he liked to be coached while he was sitting behind his desk because he felt safer there. And I said, okay, fine, I'll meet him where he is. And anyways, there was a day when he was just even more so deflecting everything. And he was very warm. We had a great rapport. He was a good coachee, but he just wouldn't actually step in to do the work. So one time he just said some comment. I'm like, oh, damn, I was cursing under my breath. So I just stood up and leaned over the table and said, Steve, I'm not your doctor. I said, I firmly believe, though, that if you continue this pattern of behavior, in 6 months, you will be dead. And I will be profoundly sad because you're a good man. I mean, he kind of does this in his chair. It was a big risk, you know, he could have like fled or panicked or whatever. And he just stopped. And, you know, and he's being a good engineer. He said, so what should I do about this? I said, well, that's a start. Just finally admit you have something to do here. And so we embarked on this complete remodeling of his entire life. Helping him release a number of stories that were driving this workaholism. stories which no one knew about his dying wife and all kinds of other things in his life. And one by one, I mean, to the point where I asked him in that same session, so just as an example, so what did you have for dinner last night? I have no idea. Did you eat dinner last night? I don't remember. I said, so I rest my case. And so, like, for example, his first week's assignment for me was, I want you to have dinner every night, because you often don't. And I want you to bring next week a list of what you had for dinner every night in that week, and to circle the one that was your favorite. And he did. So now the journey began. And 6 months later, we finished up our contract. And then I got an email from him like a month after that and said, you'd be happy to know I've quit. And I'm going to another state where it's warmer. And I'm going to be near my grown kids because I've lost touch with them. And I realized for my own well-being, I needed a different life. And so it's within a coaching context, but I think if you followed most traditional coaching models, if I had been earlier in my career, I would not have had the courage to have that conversation with him. But I thought none of this is, my coaching is moot, because he's not at a place where he can receive any of this. And once he sort of cracked that shell and got into the game, he was amazing. And in a matter of months, he was able to transform pretty much every aspect of his life. And I think he was just helping get things in order so he could quit. He wasn't ready to quit when we were done. And they had a limited amount of budget for him. So the 720 was born with him, which is a collaborative feedback process, because we needed to create again, this is very different than coaching. I got his entire team to realize the ways in which they were colluding with his old behavior, and them to make agreements about what they were going to change about themselves so he had any chance of being successful. And all the men on the team refused to admit at first that it was Steve's problem. And then there was one the only woman on the team. She was the brave one, as often is the case for women, unfortunately for us men. But she said, on this one, I can really see how I've slacked off in my job, because I know that it doesn't matter. It's never good enough for Steve. He's going to come in and fix it anyways. So I've just stopped doing certain things. And that's putting more load on him. And I care about him. And I need to up my game so he has a chance to have the spaciousness to learn and grow. That's one example, Sharman. Is that helpful to you?
Thank you. Yeah.
Are there other questions or thoughts? And welcome to Catherine and Robert. I just want to acknowledge you there. We can't see you, but we're glad you're with us. And if you want to share anything, you can put it in the chat box, or you can come off mute and share that.
Sorry, David, another question for me.
You can have as many as you want, Kimmy. There's no limit.
So then do you recommend that someone goes through narrative release first before going through narrative coaching to create space, or yeah? So
most people start with narrative coaching because it's recognizable, more familiar to them as a coaching frame. And we have people that do start with the ID Way program first, because most of their work's not in the coaching space. It's more inside organizations as a consultant or a facilitator or a workshop leader. And they don't do a lot of coaching. So they will start there. Both programs, the ID Way and narrative coaching, are built on the same philosophy. So you'd recognize yourself in either of them. So it doesn't really matter which one you start with, but if you do a fair bit of coaching at all, then most people would start with narrative coaching. Is that your perspective? Like, what would you say, Michelle? You've done them all.
Well, I found narrative coaching gave me a framework of some type.
Yeah.
And so I just really needed to understand all of that, because I I'm a new coach, so I'm totally green. And so then when I blended it, when ID came through, it's kind of like a marriage, because you can see how David has created what he's created, yet there's all these gifts along the way which kind of marry everything together.
Yeah.
And so it is true. I use everything. It's, you know, that David mentioned 8 to 10 hats.
Yeah.
Because I never come in. I come in with a blank canvas, basically, because the frames, the frameworks and all of his programs are just there for whatever's needed for the client, depending on what's being shared and whatever moment is actually needed. So I suppose if with narrative coaching, for me to get my ICF accreditation, I wasn't a coach. So, you know, in that little, you know, to fit in there, it just happens that the gifts all kept coming after that as well. I'd love to share my story about narrative release, just on what Sharman was saying.
Sure.
Being a new coach or a practitioner with all of and only of David's work, I met some beautiful people in the community, and we ended up working together. And we ended up having a contract with I'm from Sydney, Australia, and we ended up having a contract with America in New York with one of the Department of Health. We had gone through all these sessions, and behind the scenes, because we're on Zoom, there's so much going on that we don't really know, right? So we only know what's in front of us. And this one particular session, there was quite senior people in the room, and whatever was going on in New York, everybody shut their screens down and no one talked. And if I hadn't, and of course it was an ID project blended with narrative coaching. However, if I hadn't done narrative release, I wouldn't have understood how to hold the space for that particular moment, because it was like people were saying, no, we've had enough. No one's listening to us. And here we are supposed to hold space, yet they were objecting right in front of our faces. So it's more people on the screen than what I'm seeing now. We're basically saying to us as the coaches, no, we're objecting. So we sat there and I just took in narrative release, everything I've learned, and held space for that moment. They didn't know what to do because we didn't say anything. They didn't say anything, and they were wondering what was going on, even though they're the ones that were objecting. So the time had come to the end. So we're all wondering, all of us are wondering what's going to happen next. We didn't know. And our lead of the project came on the screen, and she brought her dog, her puppy dog, up onto the screen. Next minute, everybody came back on the screen with all their animals.
Wow.
And that changed that whole moment. We could have said, hey, don't waste our time. You know, if we had joined them in that, which we didn't know anything, and then the relationship started to bloom from there. The respect came in. So I just wanted to share how narrative release was needed in that moment. Yeah.
Wow. I would call it presence, since I do not have exposure to narrative release, but Michelle, what you just described, reading from something, like noticing, being sensitive, and being available for that.
And I'll mention checking in on ourselves, so it's not part of our story.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you.
Anybody else want to share? Okay.
If there is another question, David, this is a question, and feel free to say it later.
Okay.
Last time when I looked at your programs, I was kind of lost, like, oh, where do I start? So if you could kind of like give a like easy way to navigate, like what means what or where to start kind of map, I think that.
Yeah, so it's fair enough. So so we have 2 programs now, not 3. So that will help some. So it just narrows the choices. And I was saying to Kimmy, they're based on the same philosophy, but they're really different programs. So one is explicitly largely for coaches, though we have a lot of not coaches there, but it's really about teaching you a coaching methodology. And the ID Way experience is really an opportunity for you to be able to incorporate this work in whatever you're already doing. So we have facilitators, we have OD consultants, we've had probably a dozen professors at universities looking at how they're going to take this into their classrooms. We had one of our women who was on the call this morning, was so inspired by the program. She's now reached out, and she was a fairly quiet person when the program began, but she's now reached out and in like 90 days created a whole new degree program with one of the department chairs. And so this one is really for people that want to work more systemically, people that want to really upgrade what it is they already do, which could be coaching. You know, you could use this in coaching as well, but often it's people wanting to use it for other things. So you'll get and this one will have less teaching, because most of the teaching will, in true ID fashion, will be in your library, not live with me. So we're going to do a lot. Imagine it's like a retreat and a laboratory in the same space for the ID Way program. To Michelle's point, like, how do I need to develop myself so I'm mature enough not to panic when my clients all shut their screens? And then what do I do as a little micro intervention, which is what your project lead did, by how do we break the ice and socially, gracefully welcome us all back into this space as humans. So mostly I just say it depends on what part of your practice you want to focus on. That's the clearest way to distinguish which program of the 2 you should take. Okay. And there's I'll put them in the chat box, but I'll give you the page to the new website for this program. I'll put that in the chat box, and as well as you have, if you have more questions after we're done today, I'll put in the calendar link for you to be able to set up some time with me. Okay. All right. So I'd like to move forward. And Janice, do you have a question? You look like you were poised. You were like almost poised 2 or 3 times. I thought, oh, I know she's got a question in there somewhere.
Yeah, I know. It's slightly different to what other people are asking. So I was just really curious. One of the phrases that I wrote down when you were going through your case study was where you challenged your participants. Do you trust yourself to use what you know when you know it? Yeah. Now that's a kind of a big pull for me, because that's when I'm going into some slightly difficult situations. That's one that I need to kind of just hold on to. Ask myself, do I do that? But my question was really, so when this group of people who didn't know you particularly well, you didn't know them particularly well, when you offered that challenge, what did you observe? You said when you were talking quite quickly about it that they went, oh yeah. But what did you really think was happening for them?
Well, I think it's not a uniform response.
Yeah.
One of the stories I made up about what I observed from many of them, because I had been saying that all workshop long. And I think there was this sort of, as the Aussies would say, the penny dropped for them. And you could see the look in their faces. Oh, he means this. He really actually means this. He wants us to trust ourselves. And I said, everything that you need to know to make your slides better is already in the room. Matter of fact, some of you actually could already be better at this. You don't because you're trapped in some of your own stories about what you think should be in these slides. So what if you actually just trusted yourself Well, then I might be vulnerable. Oh, well, we can work on that. So the slides surfaced their lack of their unwillingness to be vulnerable. Like, what if somebody needs something that's not in my slides? Well, you could just send them an email when you're done with the workshop and send it to them. Do they have to have it right now? Well, no. But what if they ask me a question I don't have an answer for? Well, then I don't know, but I'll find out for you. And then we started looking at identity, like how do they see themselves? How do they want to be seen by others? And they started making fun of themselves, you know, and a couple of times they would sort of mock each other and they'd do caricatures of each other. And, you know, and choose sort of Aussie, take the spit out of people way. And they started to have fun as learners. And it didn't, to varying degrees, some people just like did their job and then left, but there was it was probably a workshop with one of the highest levels of camaraderie I'd ever seen. They all realized that they all were horrible at the same thing, to varying degrees. And they all said, you know, he actually is trusting us to figure this out. And he really is telling us to go talk to each other. And like in the beginning, one of them came up and said, I think those people over there could be helpful to me. Is it okay with you if I go talk to them? And I had to keep and ours really helpful. I had to keep a straight face. Like, what do you like? You get paid $300,000 a year that you're asking me for permission to go walk across the room. Like, what is that? But they were, you know, because Australia can be kind of a conformist culture around some of these kind of things. And I said, yes, that would be great. I think you'd have a lovely conversation with them. And they needed my permission because they're in the paradigm of what a workshop is. Where I have to have all the answers and they have to defer to me and they also have to grumble about me and blah, blah, blah. And I said, I'm only here to help you be successful. And again, not everybody's going to be, some people never make that leap. They never actually allow themselves to be in that space. But I treat them as adults and say, do what you're going to do. I'm not here to try to convert you or change you or have you be any different. If you don't want to play, then fine. I said, I'll get mad if you start deterring other people. But if this isn't for you or you're not ready for this or it's too scary, then, you know, do what you need to do and it's fine. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Robert has a great question about structured emergence. So if you go back to these examples where I do my best to forego the creation of curriculum, which assumes that I can create the structure before I know what's going to happen. And therefore I feel I have to control the workshop so it stays within the boundaries of what I've already planned. And so you know, if like, especially when you're new at something, like you feel like you're getting confidence that you're better at it. So I'll give you just a self-deprecating example for myself of structured emergence. So I was like my father, I was a really good swimmer. I often was a lifeguard. It's one of the ways I made money, like in college. And you had to take these classes every year in college to keep getting recertified to be a lifeguard at the university pool. So one of them that we had to do, because they're opening up this pool to more schools, was group lifesaving. How do you, like if a small boat tips over in a lake and you've got 7 kids or 5, whatever, how do you manage that? So we've done various trainings and practices and it comes like the real deal. It's the test. So they actually brought a little boat from somewhere on the campus and they put it in the middle of the pool. They put some of the students in there and then they lined the rest of us up on the side of the pool. And for whatever reason, I got chosen to go first. Great. And you're in front of all your friends and you want to look cool and you want to, you know, and so then the people go out in the middle of the pool, the teacher says, go, and I completely froze. Because I realized that I was imagining in my mind with 4, like there was 4 people in the boat, I would just do 4 rescues, one at a time. Whereas she was asking me to rescue all 4 at the same time. And I realized I had all the skills. I was one of the best swimmers in the class, blah, blah, blah. I didn't have so what was emerging was this invitation to rescue people in a different way, all at the same time. What would have been really helpful was all of the training we'd gotten was how to actually do the rescue, not how to get started. And she said, why didn't you ask that? Because the whole plan was we were supposed to get all of our peers to help me go out there. I can't rescue them 4 people at once. And he said, well, you never said that. I was so literal. I was like focused on, I have to now heroically go save 4 people. How can I ever do that? And I just panicked. And the obvious solution of just turn, like there's a person right here. Did I think to turn there? No. So it's like that with structured emergence. So it comes from the work of a guy named Lev Vygotsky, who's a child psychologist. And that when there's a point like for children where they get up to the point where they could almost do something like walking, but they can't quite there. So what's the scaffolding they need, the structure they need to take literally that next step, like holding onto the wall or your leg or whatever. And so the same thing is true for adults. So if she had just said, the activation for all this is turning to your neighbors and asking them to help you and leading them to guide the rescue together, then that would have, when I got to that emergent moment, I would have had the structure I need to know how to get started. So we do this in say, for example, in workshops, when somebody would come over, call me over, like in this one on the slides, and say, I'm stuck here, I don't know how to do this one slide. Traditionally, you would just tell them, or you remember when we looked at this model, or we'd say, what have you tried so far? Some kind of lame thing. But now we're saying, we're trying to gauge, like, what does stuck mean? Like, what about this is getting in their way? Being stuck doesn't tell me anything, because I don't know what would be helpful. So instead of trying to figure out the solution, I'm trying to figure out what the question actually is, until they can articulate to me what stuck means to them. And then we say, great, if that's the last piece that they need to be able to do this, what is the structure and the scaffolding I can bring into place, not to do this for them, but to create enough of a backstop or whatever they need, a holding space for them to actually to take their final step. And so we're using what we know to create structures for people when they're ready for them, not when it comes up in the workshop according to our plan. And this is where the NR piece is going to be really helpful. So for example, you might be doing a workshop on communication. And one of the issues you're trying to teach them is around how to be clear and concise and candid, in terms of, especially if you're a leader, you need people to do things and really speak up and have a voice, your own presence and your own voice as a leader. And then you're working in a workshop on this, and somebody, a man or a woman, calls you over and says, I'm having a really hard time with this. So again, I don't know what that means or what's actually in their way. And so they might kind of, their voice might drop and they get a little bit quieter and they want more privacy. And so I realize this is difficult for them. And they say, some version of, when I grew up, if I spoke up, I got smacked. I'm not gonna, so if I try to talk that way to somebody else, it sends shivers through me. I can't. So this is where NR says, well, okay, so what can be done here? How do I show deep compassion for this person? How do I help them find a space to actually take their first step? If I don't have that, I'm stuck in my head trying to brainstorm how to teach this skill in a new way. It's not about this skill. It's going to be a very articulate, very competent leader who has some residual trauma that's keeping him or her from actually stepping into their full authority as a leader. That's an NR issue for me. It's not a leadership skill development piece. All right. Okay. Thanks, Robert. All right, so I'm going to do, we've got a little bit of time left. We're going to do an abbreviated version of this just to give you a taste of this, and then we'll come back together and see if there's any final questions about the program itself. So I'm going to just create some breakout rooms for you here. Okay, perfect. And we'll do this for all right. So what we're gonna do, so I'm gonna suggest before I open up the rooms, I'm gonna start sharing the screen again. I'm gonna suggest you take get this out of the way, a screenshot of this slide. I want to just talk to this for a minute, and then I'm gonna allow you to do this. But taking a screenshot will be helpful because so we're just going to do this one direction. That's all you really have time for. So one of the things we do in this program is we sort of subscribe to the Gestalt theory of paradoxical theory of change. So rather than trying to move forward, we're trying to go deeper or rise up and see things in a way. But and we use in the program, we use our breath, we use our awareness to, instead of like scurrying around, arguing over the leaves or the flowers or trying to change things and just mudding up everything. A lot of this work is just helping people settle, notice what they notice and what becomes possible for them. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask one of you to share in your group, and to whatever degree you choose for yourself, something you're finding challenging at the moment. And then I'm going to invite one of you, if you're in a group of 3, just pick one of you, to ask them these questions. So first off, what are you being asked to let go of? This is the beginning of the release. As you think about your situation, what is it asking of you in terms of what you might need to let go of? And with that, you might even get them to notice some of their exhaling, like, oh, I've been holding on to this. I've got to get this perfectly before I try, or I don't know what to say, or I need to let go of my whatever I need to let go of. And just exhale and let them be clear about their exhaling, to begin to allow themselves to let go, to make space. And then the individuation piece, out of the model, narrative coaching model, is if you were to let go of this, who are you being invited to become? So if I let go of my need to be perfect, I'm being invited to become somebody who could ask for help. And again, more like, what if I didn't have to do this all by myself? There's a huge exhale. People that have a need to carry burdens or to be heroic often hold their breath a lot. Right? They can't ever be at risk of not having breath because you never know what they're going to have to carry. So part of their individuation journey is discovering that, like this woman in the graphic, sinking into what's trying to be birthed in me, or what's trying to emerge from me, as we'll see in a minute. But who am I being invited to become? And then you get to a very grounded space of that, and then begins the release up, the sort of the in breath. Oh, I could do this, I could release up into something that's new for me. And that question then is, you would ask them, and you can just stick with these questions. If something else comes up that's unique to their situation, fine, as a second question, but you can just use these and it will be just fine. The third question on the way up is, building on who you want to be invited to become. So what is wanting to emerge here? Oh, a stronger voice, a straighter posture, a softer touch. And beginning to just notice that. This is all about noticing. It's not about trying to get somewhere and be better or be different. It's just noticing, like, what is wanting to emerge here? And then all the way up through the inhale of the fuller and fuller breath. So what's different for you now? About how you see yourself, about how you see the situation, about what you imagine yourself doing. And then the cycle of breath continues again. We will do many versions of this in the program itself, but I want to just give you a feel for how these two pieces kind of go together in this particular experience. And again, to have one of you share a story briefly, we don't need all the details, and then the other person can ask you these series of 4 questions. Are there any questions about the activity?
Yep. How much time are we going to have?
You'll have about 15 minutes, which should be enough for one person to do this just fine. Let me get to the breakout room, see if that's still good. Oh, you'll be in pairs. Perfect. I'm opening up the rooms. Have a wonderful conversation. There they are. All right. I've put a link in the chat box. If any of you want to talk longer or talk more, you can book an appointment with me using that link. And if you want to find out more about the program, you can go to integrativedevelopment.com. And it's on our last slide here, so I can put that in the box too. And then it has all the information on the program, et cetera. But for now, we just have a few minutes. I just want to see kind of what emerged from your conversation that you'd like to share. And we'll call it a day. And Rob, good to see you.
Yes. Sorry.
Yes.
I got home, so I.
Good for you. I'm hoping so. You have a very big car. Yeah. Yeah, Jenna.
I was able to shift from a place of worry in my head to more that feeling of energy in my body for what I actually wanted to create. So that was a nice and unexpected, actually. It was great.
Wonderful.
I started to really understand that notion of emergence that you were talking about. Kemi had talked about something, and she's, and we sort of revealed something, and she's like, I'm not sure this is new. There's nothing against it, to push against. So what is this? I need to sit with it. And I was like, oh, okay, because you change a narrative and there's something new emerges.
Yeah. And it's not fully formed. It's often not visible. It's hardly ever verbal yet because you don't have words for it. It's kind of a sensing into life of something that's trying to happen.
But it's there. Yeah.
But it's already there the whole time. We just can't see it yet, in a way. And so you discover that most of life is run by muses who are just like doing this with us all the time. Yeah. Janice is finding that funny. That's good. Yeah. Yeah, and it will show up in really amazing serendipities. And yeah, so anything else about your experience you'd like to share, Tom?
Yeah, David. One thing I did notice is because this is the first time I did it. I think what's underneath that model is silence. Really need the silence to, I find, to slow the things down, because if I'm rushing it, then it just feels I'm going through a process. I think it's important to silence and wait for something to emerge in that. And that's what I discovered when I was coaching someone.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we're not hunters. We're not trying to go find something, it's more about we're just settling ourselves so we can see what was there the whole time.
Hi, David. Yes, I wanted to randomly ask a question, because I was the coachee, as Robert said, and he did a fantastic job, even though he left me hanging at first.
The internet dropped out, and so poor Kimmy was by herself in the room dealing with all of her abandonment
pouring
issues.
my heart out. If that first question of what are you being asked to let go of, if what you feel you're being asked to let go of actually doesn't put you in a, shall I say, happy place, but you feel quite sad at the idea of letting that go, is that normal? Is that expected? Or should you have a narrative of something that you let go of, that when you do say it, you feel like, yeah, actually, that's what I do want to let go of?
I would say the most common experience is grief of some kind.
Okay.
Even if it's something that you can't wait to get rid of, there's still grief, because a pattern has changed, a relationship has changed, your narrative has changed, and for me, one of the fundamental reasons why organizational change projects don't work, of which there's legions of reasons, one of which was the companies don't make provisions for the grief that's inevitable. And there's no space to grieve at work. And so you can't change if you don't grieve in some fashion, I believe. Yeah, and so, but again, if I were working with you, I wouldn't go in with the assumption, oh, I have to get Kemi to grieve, otherwise it's not going to happen. No, it's like, I wonder what experience Kimmy's having right now, or what grief means to her, or what it feels like, or, you know, if I were to ask you how many of you have ended or a relationship in your life that was significant for you or been ended, someone else ended the relationship, and how many of you would say that was like a really, really hard or bad day, right? And how many of you would say it was a great day? We couldn't wait to get out of there. And how many of you would say it's both, right? And so we don't know what the person's what's trying to emerge yet. We're just noticing and creating the scaffolding. So whatever's there, we're ready to be with it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and for me, it was almost hard to name the thing to let go of, because so I had a fear of letting go of this behavior for reasons, you know, I could document why I wouldn't want to let go of it. But so to even name it, so well, now am I going to be held accountable for letting go of that? So it's, you know, there's some trepidation.
Sure.
You know, it wasn't relief just naming it.
Yeah. And so because, you know, it sometimes takes many loops through this to get somebody to really get to what's really going on. But the way I give them comfort is we're not like asking you to throw it away. We're just saying, let me just put it on the table for a while. You can have it back if you want it, or you can just leave it there. And then you might notice like you can move away from farther from the table. But you know, some people want to burn things or compost them, and other people, it's more of a journey to let that go. And it's there's nothing for them to do yet other than to create space for what's trying to emerge. So it's not gone. You're just not holding on to it with a death grip. And you're just like, what if I were just like to release it a little bit and maybe open up my clenched fist around it, my dependency or my need for this or my whatever. Oh, look at that. I can actually see it. Do I actually really want that? No, it's kind of old and dusty. I think I'm going to put it down for now. And just let it sit there until the next step emerges. Yeah. And we never take things away from people. They have to be, that's why it's not narrative grabbing. It's narrative releasing. Yeah. Anything else for you right now?
I really appreciated Janice doing the coaching for me. It was super relevant for today. I thought the topic was not heavy enough, but it was very.
Oh, good. All right. Well, I'm going to thank you for your time. Like I said, if you need more space to talk more or ask more questions, just book some time. Otherwise, you can go to the website and find out more. And hopefully some of you will come and join us. It'd be fabulous. All right.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Have a wonderful day or evening wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you again soon. All right. Bye.
Bye.